The bitter Wyoming wind cut through the valley like a knife, carrying with it the promise of an early winter. Jack Holbrook stood on the porch of his cabin, eyes scanning the horizon where the mountains met the darkening sky. At 35, he was a man carved by solitude and hardship, his face weathered like the leather of his work gloves, his gray eyes holding the wariness of someone who'd learned not to trust easily. The ranch sprawled before him, 200 acres of stubborn land that fought him every season, but was his nonetheless. Cattle lowed in the distance, their breath forming clouds in the cooling air. A wolf howled somewhere in the pines, and Jack's hand instinctively moved to the rifle propped against the doorframe. Out here, 15 miles from the nearest neighbor and a full day's ride from town, a man learned to be his own company and protection. Inside the cabin, the oil lamp cast dancing shadows on the rough-hewn walls. Jack sat at his table, a sheet of paper before him, his calloused fingers gripping the pen awkwardly. Writing had never come easy to him, not like breaking horses or mending fences. But loneliness had a way of making a man do things he'd never imagined. "To the marriage correspondence agency," he began, his handwriting careful and deliberate. "I am seeking a wife. Must be of good Christian character, virginal, obedient, and willing to work hard. No complicated past. I offer a good home, protection, and honest living." He paused, then added, "No time for foolishness or modern notions. Need someone pure and simple." The words looked harsh on paper, but Jack had his reasons. 3 years ago, Margaret had taught him well. Beautiful Margaret with her golden hair and lying heart, who'd promised to wait while he built their future, only to run off with a traveling merchant while carrying another man's child. The betrayal had frozen something inside him, left him with strict ideas about what kind of woman deserved his trust. 500 miles east, in a narrow room above a Boston millinery shop, Clara Mitchell read the advertisement for the dozenth time. At 24, she should have been married with children by now. But life had taken a different path. Her hands trembled slightly as she traced the words. Virginal, pure, no complicated past. Everything she was not, everything she could never be again. The room was sparse but clean, a far cry from the compound she'd escaped 18 months ago. Even now, the memory made her stomach clench. The Holy Redemption House, they'd called it, a place for wayward women to find salvation under the guidance of Reverend Elias Thornton. But there had been no salvation there, only control, manipulation, and darkness she still couldn't speak about. Clara moved to the small mirror on her dresser, studying her reflection. Auburn hair pulled back severely, green eyes that had learned to hide their thoughts, a face that could pass for innocent if she was careful. She'd become an expert at appearing demure, at making herself smaller, quieter, less noticeable. It was armor, learned through pain. The decision came suddenly, like a door opening in a windowless room. She would answer this rancher's advertisement. She would lie. Lord forgive her, but she would lie to survive. Out west, far from Boston, far from anyone who might recognize her or know her shame. Perhaps she could disappear into a new life. Her letter was brief, each word chosen to paint a picture of the woman Jack Holbrook wanted. Dear Mr. Holbrook, I'm writing in response to your advertisement. I am 24 years of age, of good moral character, raised in the church. I can cook, sew, and keep house. I seek an honest marriage with a good man. I have no family ties to keep me in Boston. If you find me suitable, I am prepared to travel west immediately. Yours respectfully, Miss Clara Mitchell. She didn't mention the nightmares that still woke her, or the way certain biblical verses made her hands shake, or how the smell of frankincense could send her running from a room. These were truths that would stay buried. 2 months later, Clara stood on the platform of the Union Pacific Railroad, her single trunk beside her, ticket clutched in gloved hands. The journey would take 5 days. 5 days to transform from the broken woman she was into the pure bride Jack Holbrook expected. The train whistle screamed, and she climbed aboard, each step taking her further from one life and closer to a deception that might save her. The journey was a blur of changing landscapes and sleepless nights. Clara watched America unfold outside her window, Cities giving way to farmland, farmland to prairie, prairie to the raw, untamed beauty of the mountains. Other passengers came and went, but she kept to herself, practicing in her mind the role she would play, innocent, untouched, worthy of a good man's protection. When the train finally wheezed to a stop in Cheyenne, Clara's heart was hammering. Through the window, she saw him immediately, tall, broad-shouldered, standing apart from the crowd with the stillness of a man comfortable with solitude. Jack Holbrook looked exactly like his letter suggested. Serious, weathered, unlikely to smile easily. She descended slowly, aware that this was the moment her new life began. Jack's eyes found her, taking in her modest traveling dress, her carefully arranged hair, the Bible she carried, a prop now, though it had once meant something. His expression softened slightly. Approval, perhaps even relief. "Miss Mitchell?" His voice was deep, roughened by wind and few words. "Mr. Holbrook." She kept her eyes modestly lowered, played the part of the sheltered maiden. "I hope my journey hasn't inconvenienced you." "Not at all." He moved to take her trunk, his movements efficient. "Got the wagon waiting. It's a fair piece to the ranch." As he loaded her belongings, Clara stole glances at the man who would be her husband. His clothes were clean but worn, his boots resolute against the muddy street. There was a loneliness about him that matched her own, though his seemed chosen while hers had been forced upon her. The ride to the ranch took 4 hours. Jack spoke little, pointing out landmarks occasionally. Devil's Canyon, Medicine Bow Peak, the creek that marked his property line. Clara responded when appropriate, but didn't push for conversation. She sensed he was evaluating her, measuring her against some internal standard. The ranch, when it finally came into view, was both more and less than she'd imagined. The cabin was sturdy but small, the barn well maintained, the whole operation speaking of hard work and modest success. Mountains rose on all sides, their peaks already white with early snow. It was isolated in a way that might have frightened her once, but now the distance from civilization felt like safety. "It's beautiful," she said, and meant it. Jack glanced at her, surprised. "It's hard country. Not everyone takes to it. I'm not afraid of hard work. Mr. Holbrook." He nodded, satisfied with this answer. As he helped her down from the wagon, his hands were gentle despite their size and strength. For a moment, standing in the yard of what would be her home, Clara felt something she hadn't in so long. Hope, perhaps here, in this vast emptiness, she could build something true on a foundation of lies. But as Jack showed her to her room, small, clean, separated from his by a thin wall, she caught his expression when he thought she wasn't looking. There was a hunger there, carefully controlled, and expectations as solid as the mountains surrounding them. He wanted his pure bride, his reward for choosing virtue over beauty, for being a good man who deserved an unspoiled wife. That night, as Clara unpacked her few belongings and listened to Jack moving about in the main room, she prayed for the first time in months, not to the God of Reverend Thornton, who had been twisted into something cruel and controlling, but to whatever force had brought her this far. She prayed for the strength to maintain her deception, for Jack to be the kind of man who might eventually understand, and for the chance to find peace in this wilderness. Outside, the wind howled through the pines, and somewhere in the darkness, that wolf called again, lonely, defiant, surviving. The first morning came too soon. Clara woke to the sound of Jack moving about in the main room, the scrape of boots on wood, the clatter of the coffee pot. For a moment, she forgot where she was, and panic seized her chest, the familiar terror of waking in a place where she had no control. Then memory returned. Wyoming, the ranch, her new life built on necessary lies. She dressed quickly in one of her 2 work dresses, pinned her hair severely back, and stepped into the main room. Jack stood by the stove, his back to her, broad shoulders tense with an alertness that never seemed to leave him. "Morning," he said without turning. "Coffee's ready. I'll show you the morning chores after breakfast." Clara moved carefully, aware of his eyes tracking her as she poured coffee and began preparing biscuits. She'd learned to cook in the compound, though under vastly different circumstances. Here, at least, her hands were steady, her movements her own. "You rise early," she observed, keeping her voice mild. "Ranch don't run itself." Jack sat at the table, watching her work. "You'll need to learn the animals, the routine. Winter's coming fast this year." She nodded, kneading dough with practiced hands. "I'm ready to learn." What followed was a week of careful education. Jack showed her how to milk their 2 cows, how to scatter grain for the chickens, how to check for eggs without disturbing the temperamental hens. He taught her which wood burned best, how to bank the fire to last through cold nights, where to find the root cellar he dug into the hillside. Through it all, he maintained a careful distance. He was polite but remote, speaking only when necessary, watching her constantly as if waiting for her to reveal some flaw. Clara played her part perfectly, the innocent girl eager to please, quick to learn but appropriately humble. She lowered her eyes when he looked too long, blushed when their hands accidentally touched passing tools or supplies. But the strain was exhausting. Every moment required calculation. When Jack mentioned the Bible, she had to remember to look pleased rather than sick. When he spoke of virtue and proper behavior, she had to nod rather than remember Reverend Thornton's twisted sermons about purity and submission. Most difficult were the quiet evenings when Jack would read from his few books while she mended clothes. The domestic scene a mockery of the peace she desperately wanted but couldn't quite grasp. "You're different than I expected," Jack said one evening, breaking a long silence. Clara's needle paused. "How so?" "Quieter. Most women from back east, they chatter like magpies. You barely speak unless spoken to." She forced a small smile. "I was taught that a woman should be seen more than heard." "Who taught you that?" The question was casual, but Clara heard the testing beneath it. "My mother. God rest her soul. She passed when I was young." The lie came smoothly. She'd practiced it so many times it almost felt true. Jack nodded, apparently satisfied. "Good woman. Sounds like important to have proper upbringing." That night, Clara lay awake listening to coyotes in the distance and wondered what Jack would think of her true upbringing. The father who'd sold her to the compound to pay debts. The mother who'd turned away rather than fight for her. The years of being molded into something that existed only to serve others' twisted needs. The test came sooner than expected. Clara was in the barn, struggling with a stubborn cow that refused to let down her milk. When she heard the snarl, the wolf had crept in through a gap in the back wall, drawn by the smell of grain or perhaps simple hunger. It stood between her and the door, lips pulled back to reveal yellow fangs, its ribs showing through patchy fur. Clara froze, her mind blanking with terror. At the compound, she'd learned to be still, to be invisible, to weather whatever came. But stillness wouldn't save her from a starving wolf. "Don't move." Jack's voice came from behind her, calm and steady. She heard the click of his rifle cocking. "When I say, dive to your left, now." She threw herself sideways as the shot exploded in the enclosed space. The wolf yelped and bolted, leaving a trail of blood. Jack was after it in an instant, chasing it out of the barn. Another shot echoed across the ranch, then silence. Clara stayed on the ground where she'd fallen, shaking, not from the wolf, from the gunshot, the violence, the sudden reminder of how quickly safety could shatter. When Jack returned, she was still there, arms wrapped around her knees. "It's dead," he said, then noticed her state. "You hurt?" She shook her head, not trusting her voice. Jack crouched beside her, and for the first time since she'd arrived, his expression showed something beyond watchful distance. "First time seeing something like that?" "Yes," she whispered, which was true enough. She'd seen other kinds of predators. His hand moved as if to touch her shoulder, then stopped. "You did good, stayed calm, moved when I said." Some women would have screamed, spooked it into attacking. "I've learned not to scream," Clara said before she could stop herself. Jack's eyes sharpened. "That's an odd thing to say." She scrambled for cover. "I mean, my mother taught me that hysteria helps nothing. Better to stay calm in crisis." He studied her a moment longer, then stood, offering his hand. She took it, let him pull her to her feet. His palm was rough with calluses, warm against her cold fingers. He held on a second longer than necessary, and she saw something flicker in his eyes. Concern, perhaps, or the first stirring of softer feelings. "Come inside," he said. "I'll fix that cut." Clara looked down, surprised to see blood on her hand where she'd scraped it falling. She hadn't even noticed. At the compound, she'd learned to ignore pain, to step outside her body when necessary. Jack led her to the cabin, sat her at the table, and fetched water and clean cloth. His touch was gentle as he cleaned the wound, careful as he wrapped it. "Thank you," she managed, watching his focused expression. There was a kindness in him, buried deep beneath the wariness and strict expectations. "Can't have you getting infected," he said gruffly, but his thumb brushed her wrist as he finished the bandage. And this time, she was certain it wasn't accidental. That night at dinner, the atmosphere was different. Jack asked her about Boston, about her journey west. Clara spun careful half-truths, describing the city she'd barely seen, inventing memories of a childhood that had ended the day her father had needed money more than a daughter. "Why'd you answer my advertisement?" Jack asked suddenly. "Pretty girl like you must have had options." Clara felt heat rise in her cheeks at being called pretty. "I wanted something real," she said, which was perhaps the most honest thing she'd told him. "The men in Boston, they seemed to want ornaments, not partners. Your letter spoke of work and honesty. That appealed to me." Jack nodded slowly. "I meant what I wrote, about wanting someone pure, unspoiled by the world. Too many women these days got modern ideas, forgotten their proper place. And what is a woman's proper place?" Clara asked carefully. "Beside her husband, supporting him, keeping his home, raising his children, being faithful, obedient." His eyes met hers across the table. "Being his completely—" Clara's stomach tightened. She'd belonged to someone completely once, and it had nearly destroyed her. But she kept her expression mild, nodded as if his words were perfectly reasonable. "Of course," she said. "A wife should cleave only unto her husband." Jack's expression warmed. "We'll be married soon, week or two. Once you're settled in proper, that sit well with you?" "Yes," Clara said, though the word felt like swallowing glass. She thought of the wedding night that would follow, of Jack discovering her deception, of having to pretend innocence she'd lost long ago. But what choice did she have? This was the bargain. Her lies for his protection, her performance for a chance at a life. That night, alone in her room, Clara unwrapped the bandage on her hand to examine the cut. It was minor, already beginning to heal. She thought of Jack's careful touch, the gentleness that seemed at odds with his rigid expectations. He was not a cruel man. She could see that, but he was a man who'd built his world on specific beliefs about how things should be, and she was about to shatter every one of them. Outside, snow began to fall, the first real storm of the approaching winter. Clara watched it through her small window, seeing how it covered the landscape in white, hiding the harsh reality beneath a blanket of pristine beauty. She understood the impulse. Wasn't she doing the same thing, covering her past in layers of careful lies? But snow melted. Eventually, truth had a way of seeping through, no matter how deep you buried it. And when Jack learned what lay beneath her pristine surface, Clara could only pray his capacity for gentleness was stronger than his need for purity. The wind howled through the gaps in the walls, and Clara pulled her shawl tighter, preparing for another sleepless night in her elaborate deception. The morning of their wedding dawned crisp and clear, the mountains wrapped in fresh snow that sparkled like broken glass. Clara stood before her small mirror, hands trembling as she pinned her mother's cameo to her collar, one of the few true things she'd brought from her past. She wore her best dress, a simple gray wool that Jack had said brought out the green in her eyes. "Ready?" Jack's voice came through the door, unusually gentle. Yes, she called back, though ready was the last thing she felt. The ride to town took 3 hours through the snow. Reverend Paul Garrett, a weathered man who served 3 mountain communities, had agreed to perform the ceremony in his small chapel. There would be no guests. Jack had no close friends, and Clara had no one at all. As they entered the chapel, Clara's steps faltered. The smell of old wood and candle wax, the sight of the simple cross on the wall, it all brought back memories she'd fought to suppress. But Jack's hand on her elbow steadied her, and she forced herself forward. The ceremony was brief. Reverend Garrett spoke of duty and faithfulness, of the sacred bond between man and wife. When Jack slipped the thin gold band on her finger, a band that had belonged to his mother, Clara felt the weight of her deception like a stone in her chest. She was taking vows she was already breaking, promising to come to him pure when purity had been stolen from her long ago. "You may kiss your bride," Reverend Garrett said with a kind smile. Jack's hands cupped her face with surprising tenderness. The kiss was brief, chaste, but Clara felt the restrained hunger beneath it. He was a man who'd waited, who'd chosen virtue over easy satisfaction, and tonight he expected his reward. The ride home was silent. Snow began falling again, fat flakes that muffled the world. Clara watched them swirl in the lamplight as darkness fell, trying not to think about what lay ahead. At the compound, she'd learned to disappear inside herself, to let her body endure while her mind fled elsewhere. But this was supposed to be different. This was supposed to be her choice, her life. Back at the cabin, Jack built up the fire while Clara prepared a simple dinner. They ate quietly, the weight of expectation heavy between them. When the dishes were done and the evening chores complete, Jack stood by the fireplace, watching her with an expression she couldn't quite read. "I know you're nervous," he said finally. "I want you to know I'll be gentle, patient." Clara's throat tightened. "Thank you," she whispered. "Go on to the bedroom," he said. "I'll give you time to prepare." She fled to what was now their shared room, Jack having moved her things that morning. Her hands shook as she changed into her nightgown, the white cotton a mockery of the innocence it was meant to represent. She sat on the edge of the bed, trying to calm her racing heart. When Jack knocked and entered, he'd removed his jacket and boots, rolled up his sleeves. In the lamplight, he looked younger, less stern. He sat beside her, not touching, and for a moment they simply breathed together. "Clara," he said softly, "you're trembling. I'm sorry, I've never—" The lie stuck in her throat. "I know." His hand covered hers where it twisted in her lap. "We'll take it slow. There's no rush." But when he leaned to kiss her, deeper this time, Clara's body betrayed her. She knew how to respond, how to move, how to arch into his touch. Jack pulled back, confusion flickering across his face. "You seem—" he began, then stopped. "I've imagined this moment," Clara said quickly, desperately. "Wondered what it would be like. Perhaps I've thought too much about it." It was the right thing to say. Jack's expression softened, and he drew her closer. "Natural enough, I suppose." But as his hands moved over her, as clothing fell away, Clara struggled to maintain her facade. Her body remembered things her mind wanted to forget. When Jack touched her in certain ways, she had to bite back responses that would have revealed too much. She tried to appear innocent, uncertain, even as every instinct screamed at her to protect herself or to take control. "Am I hurting you?" Jack asked at one point, his breath ragged. "No," she whispered. And it was true. He was gentle, considerate. Nothing like what she'd known before, but that almost made it worse. This good man believing he was claiming something that had already been taken. Afterward, Jack held her close, stroking her hair with surprising tenderness. "You were perfect," he murmured against her temple. "My pure, sweet girl." Clara bit her lip hard enough to taste blood, tears sliding silently down her cheeks in the darkness. She felt his breathing deepen into sleep, his arm heavy across her waist, and only then did she allow herself to truly cry. The days that followed were a careful dance. Jack was attentive, affectionate in his restrained way, clearly pleased with his new bride, but Clara caught him watching her sometimes with a puzzled expression, as if something didn't quite fit. She tried harder to play innocent, but it was exhausting maintaining the pretense. One afternoon, while Jack was out checking cattle, Clara found herself in the barn, pitchfork in hand, lost in the rhythm of mucking stalls. The physical work helped quiet her mind, gave her body purpose beyond deception. She didn't hear Jack return until his shadow fell across the doorway. "You work like someone who's trying to forget something," he observed. Clara's hands tightened on the pitchfork. "Just trying to earn my keep. You're my wife, not my hired hand." He stepped closer, studying her. "Sometimes I feel like I don't know you at all. Clara, like you're playing a part." Her heart hammered. "I don't know what you mean." "Don't you?" His gray eyes were sharp now, the warmth of recent days cooling. "The way you move sometimes, like you're used to men watching you. The way you knew things on our wedding night that an innocent girl shouldn't know. I told you, I'd imagined—" "Stop." The word was quiet but firm. "I may live in the mountains, Clara, but I'm not a fool. You weren't untouched when you came to me." The pitchfork slipped from her numb fingers, clattering on the barn floor. This was it, the moment she'd dreaded, arriving sooner than she'd hoped. "I can explain," she began, but Jack was already turning away. "Did you think me such a desperate man that I'd accept used goods if they were wrapped pretty enough?" His voice was cold now, the warmth of recent days completely gone. "Did you laugh at my advertisement? At the stupid mountain man wanting a pure bride?" "No." Clara stepped toward him, but he backed away. "Jack, please, let me. I need to think." He grabbed his rifle from where it leaned by the door. "Don't follow me." Clara watched him disappear into the swirling snow, her marriage unraveling as quickly as it had begun. She stood in the barn until the cold drove her inside, where she sat at the table and began to write. If Jack wouldn't listen to her speak, perhaps he would read her words. Her pen moved across the paper, telling truth she'd never spoken aloud, about her father's debts, about being sold to the Holy Redemption House, about Reverend Thornton and his twisted theology that turned young women into property, about the things she'd endured, the ways she'd been used, the miracle of her eventual escape. "I know I deceived you," she wrote, "and I'm sorry for that. But I am not sorry for surviving. I am not sorry for wanting a life beyond what was forced upon me. If that makes me unworthy of you, I understand. I'll leave as soon as the weather clears. But know this. Everything else I told you was true. I do want to be a good wife. I do want to work beside you and build something real. My past was stolen from me. But my future, that, I chose you." She sealed the letter and left it on the table, then packed her few belongings. She would sleep in the barn tonight, give Jack the space he needed. Tomorrow, if he wanted her gone, she would find a way to leave. But as night fell and Jack still hadn't returned, worry crept in. The temperature was dropping fast, and the snow had turned into a proper blizzard. Even angry, even betrayed. Jack knew these mountains. He wouldn't stay out in weather like this unless something was wrong. Clara paced the cabin, torn between respecting his wishes and fearing for his safety. When midnight passed with no sign of him, she made her choice, wrapping herself in every layer she could find, taking a lantern and rope. She ventured into the storm. The wind tried to tear her from the earth, snow blinding her within feet of the cabin. But she pressed on, calling Jack's name into the howling darkness, following the path she'd seen him take. Love might be too strong a word for what she felt for Jack Holbrook, but she'd be damned if she'd let him die thinking she'd made a fool of him. Somewhere in the white fury of the storm, a wolf howled, lonely, defiant, surviving. Clara pulled her shawl tighter and pressed on into the darkness, searching for the man who might never forgive her, but who deserved the chance to try. The letter lay on the table between them like a confession written in blood. Jack had returned near dawn, half frozen and limping from where he'd twisted his ankle in a snow-covered ravine. Clara had found him sheltering beneath an overhanging rock, had helped him home in silence, tended his injury without words. Now, as pale morning light filtered through the frost-covered windows, he sat across from her letter in his weathered hands. She watched his face as he read, saw the tightening of his jaw, the way his knuckles went white gripping the paper. When he finally looked up, his gray eyes held a storm worse than the one that had nearly claimed him. "Tell me," he said, voice rough. "Tell me all of it. No more lies." Clara drew a shaking breath. She'd written the words, but speaking them aloud was different. Speaking them made them real in a way that paper couldn't capture. "My father was Samuel Mitchell," she began, her voice barely above a whisper. "A failed merchant with a taste for whiskey and cards. When I was 17, he owed money to the wrong people. They gave him a choice, pay his debts or give them something of value." She paused, unable to meet Jack's eyes. "I was something of value." Jack's chair creaked as he shifted, but he said nothing. "The Holy Redemption House for Wayward Women," Clara continued, the name bitter on her tongue. "That's what they called it. Run by Reverend Elias Thornton, a man who preached salvation while practicing damnation. The debt collectors had an arrangement with him. He'd take young women whose families couldn't or wouldn't protect them, and in exchange—" She swallowed hard. "In exchange, he paid the debts." "A brothel," Jack said flatly. "You're describing a brothel dressed up as a church." "No." Clara's head snapped up, meeting his gaze fiercely. "Worse than that. In a brothel. At least the transaction is honest. This was spiritual imprisonment. We were told we were being saved, that serving the needs of the church's benefactors was our path to redemption, that resistance was sin, that our bodies were temples meant to be used for God's glory." Her hands clenched in her lap as memories flooded back. Reverend Thornton was careful. He chose vulnerable girls, orphans, daughters of debtors, immigrants with no family. He broke us down with scripture twisted into weapons, with punishment disguised as penance, with— She stopped, unable to continue. "How long?" Jack's voice was carefully neutral. 6 years. The words came out raw. 6 years of being told I was blessed to serve, that my suffering was holy, that questioning was blasphemy. We weren't allowed to leave the compound. We weren't allowed letters. We weren't allowed to speak to each other about our doubts. "How did you escape?" Clara almost smiled, though there was no humor in it. "Reverend Thornton made a mistake. He brought in a new girl, Catherine, whose uncle was a real minister in Philadelphia. She'd been taken by deception, told she was going to a legitimate religious retreat. When she realized what the place truly was, she fought back. She had hidden money, and more importantly, she had rage instead of resignation. She remembered Catherine's fierce whisper in the darkness. "This isn't God's will. This is men using God as an excuse." It had been the first time Clara had heard someone voice what she'd barely allowed herself to think. "Catherine planned our escape for months. There were 4 of us who fled that night during a blizzard not unlike the one we just had. 2 were caught and brought back. Catherine and I made it to Boston. She had family connections who helped her return to Philadelphia. I had nowhere to go. I worked in a millinery shop, saved every penny, and waited for a chance to disappear completely. And you chose my advertisement," Jack said, his tone unreadable. "I chose your advertisement," Clara confirmed, "because you were far away, because you seemed to want a simple life, hard work, honesty, everything except the one thing I couldn't give you." Her voice broke. "I'm sorry I lied to you, Jack, but I'm not sorry I survived." Silence stretched between them, broken only by the pop of wood in the stove. Jack stood abruptly, letter still in his hand, and moved to the window. His back was rigid, his shoulders set in a line she'd come to recognize as his thinking posture. "You made a fool of me," he said finally. "I specifically asked for a virgin, for someone pure and untouched. I know." Clara's voice was steady now. "But tell me, Jack, if I'd written the truth, would you have considered me? Would any decent man? I was marked as ruined the day my father sold me, through no choice of my own. Was I supposed to accept that as my fate forever? Jack whirled around. You could have found work, made a life without deception. Could I? Clara stood too, sudden anger giving her strength. Do you know what happens to women like me? We become invisible at best, prey at worst. Every man who learns our history sees us as either something to pity or something to use. I wanted more than that. I wanted to be seen as a person, not as damaged goods. But you are damaged goods. The words exploded from Jack, harsh and raw. You're exactly what I tried to avoid, a woman with a past, with experiences, with what? Clara stepped closer, chin raised. With knowledge of cruelty, with survival skills, with the ability to work until my hands bleed and still get up the next morning? Yes, I have all of that. I also have gentleness that wasn't beaten out of me, hope that couldn't be extinguished, and the capacity to choose love even after learning its darkest perversions. Jack's face was like stone. Love? You speak of love while standing on a foundation of lies? I speak of the possibility of love, Clara corrected. Something I never thought I'd be allowed to even hope for again. Her voice softened. Jack, I've watched you these weeks. You're a hard man. Yes, but not a cruel one. You're lonely, but too proud to admit it. You wanted a perfect wife because you're afraid of being hurt again. Don't deny it. I see how you guard yourself, but perfection isn't real. I'm real. My scars, my past, my strength, all of it is real. Your past is exactly what I cannot accept, Jack said coldly. I have principles. Principles. Clara laughed, but it was a broken sound. Tell me, what principle is served by casting out a woman for surviving abuse? What virtue is there in punishing someone for sins committed against them? Not by them. Jack's jaw tightened. You don't understand. My first engagement, Margaret, she betrayed me with another man, gave herself freely, made a fool of me. I swore I'd never... Never what? Never trust again? Never risk being human? Clara shook her head. I'm not Margaret. Jack, I didn't choose betrayal. Choice was taken from me entirely. Can't you see the difference? The result is the same. You're not pure. No, I'm not. Clara moved to her packed bag by the door. And if that's all that matters to you, then you're right. We have no future. I'll leave as soon as the weather permits. You can find another advertisement bride, and maybe she'll be everything you demand. But Jack, she paused at the door. Ask yourself this. Would you rather have a woman who comes to you untouched but untested? Or one who has been through hell and still chooses to stand beside you? She left him there, taking her bag to the barn. The animals needed feeding regardless of human drama, and the familiar routine gave her shaking hands something to do. She'd said her piece, told her truth. Now it was Jack's choice, as she scattered grain for the chickens. Clara thought about the girl she'd been when her father had traded her away, frightened, trusting, believing adults when they said things were for her own good. That girl was gone, burned away in the crucible of the compound. In her place stood a woman who knew her own strength, who could face hard truths and harder choices. The barn door opened, and Jack's shadow fell across the hay-strewn floor. Clara didn't turn, continuing to fill water buckets with steady hands. I need time, he said quietly. To think, to understand. I'm not going anywhere in this weather, Clara replied, still not facing him. Take all the time you need. She heard him shift, perhaps wanting to say more, but then his footsteps retreated. Clara closed her eyes, gripping the water bucket handle until her knuckles ached. She'd survived Reverend Thornton and his house of horrors. She'd survived the journey west and the terror of building a new identity. She would survive Jack Holbrook's judgment too, whatever it might be. Outside, the wind had calmed, leaving the world wrapped in pristine white snow that covered all the ugliness beneath. But spring would come eventually, melting away the beautiful lies to reveal the scarred earth below. The only question was whether anything could grow from such damaged ground, or whether some soil was too poisoned to ever bloom again. The fever came 3 days later. Jack had spent those days in brooding silence, going through the motions of ranch work while Clara kept to herself, sleeping in the barn despite the bitter cold. They moved around each other like wary animals, sharing space but not words. Then, on the 4th morning, Clara found him collapsed by the woodpile, burning with fever and muttering incoherently. She half dragged, half carried him inside, her small frame straining under his weight. The twisted ankle from his night in the storm had become infected, red streaks running up his leg like poison through veins. Clara had seen enough suffering to recognize danger when it stood before her. For the next week, she barely left his side. She bathed his fever-hot skin with cool cloths, forced willow bark tea between his cracked lips, changed the poultices on his infected wound every few hours. The ranch chores fell to her alone, morning and evening milking, feeding animals, breaking ice on water troughs, hauling wood to keep the fire burning. She worked until her hands bled, slept in brief snatches on the floor beside his bed, and prayed to whatever force might listen to a fallen woman's pleas. In his delirium, Jack revealed more than he ever would have conscious. He called out for Margaret, cursing her betrayal one moment and begging her to return the next. He spoke to his dead parents, apologizing for disappointing them, and, increasingly, he called for Clara, not in anger, but in need. "Don't leave," he mumbled on the 5th night, his hand catching hers with surprising strength. "I was wrong, so wrong." "Shh," Clara soothed, smoothing his sweat-damp hair. "Save your strength." "No." His gray eyes flickered open, momentarily lucid. "Need to say, you're not damaged goods. You're the strongest person I know." The fever took him again before she could respond, but his words lodged in her chest like shards of hope. On the 7th day, the fever broke. Jack woke to find Clara asleep in the chair beside his bed, her head pillowed on her arms. Even in sleep, she looked exhausted, dark circles under her eyes, her dress stained with sweat and medicine, her hands wrapped in makeshift bandages from all the extra work. He watched her for a long moment, seeing her truly for perhaps the first time, not as the pure bride he'd ordered like goods from a catalog, not as the deceiver she'd been forced to become, but as the woman who'd searched for him in a blizzard and spent a week fighting death itself to keep him alive. Clara stirred, green eyes fluttering open to meet his. "You're awake," she breathed. "How do you feel?" "Like I've been trampled by cattle." His voice was hoarse from disuse. "How long?" "A week. The infection was bad. I thought—" She swallowed. "I wasn't sure you'd make it." "You stayed." "Of course I stayed." A flash of her old fire returned. "Where would I go in this weather? Besides, the animals needed tending." But Jack saw through the deflection. "You could have let me die, solved your problems neat and clean." Clara recoiled as if slapped. "Is that what you think of me? That I'd let a man die because he'd hurt my feelings?" "I think," Jack said slowly, "that I've been a fool, and that I've badly misjudged you." They stared at each other across the narrow space, years of hurt and mistrust hanging between them. Then Clara rose stiffly, joints protesting from too many hours in that chair. "You need food. I'll heat some broth." But Jack caught her wrist as she passed, gentle despite his weakness. "Clara, thank you." 2 words, simple and inadequate, but she heard the weight behind them. She nodded once and pulled free, needing distance from the intensity in his eyes. Recovery was slow. Jack chafed at being bedridden, but his body had been pushed too far to bounce back quickly. Clara managed the ranch work alone, coming in periodically to check on him, bring food, change bandages. They talked more during those days than they had in all the weeks before. Careful conversations about safe topics like cattle prices and weather patterns. But conversation nonetheless. One afternoon, as Clara struggled to carry in an armload of firewood, Jack finally spoke what had been building between them. "Tell me about Catherine, the girl who helped you escape." Clara set down the wood carefully, buying time. "Why?" Because I want to understand, not just what happened to you, but who you became because of it." So she told him about Catherine's fierce spirit, her refusal to be broken, about the midnight whispers that had slowly awakened Clara's own dormant resistance, about the terror and exhilaration of that snowy night when they'd run, how freedom had tasted sharp and sweet like winter air. "She saved me," Clara said simply, "not just from that place, but from the belief that I deserved to be there." Jack absorbed this quietly. "And where is she now?" "Philadelphia. Last I knew, she wrote once, to say she'd married a good man who knew her story and loved her anyway." Clara's voice held a wistfulness she couldn't quite hide. "She said such men existed, rare as they might be." "I want to be that kind of man," Jack said suddenly, the words seeming to surprise him. "I thought I was demanding purity, holding to principles, but all I was doing was protecting myself from feeling anything real." Clara moved closer, drawn by the raw honesty in his voice. "Jack, no, let me finish." He struggled to sit up straighter. "When I was burning with fever, I dreamed I was in a place like your compound, trapped, voiceless, my body not my own. It was only a dream, only a few nights, but the horror of it. Clara, how did you survive 6 years? By becoming very good at being whoever they needed me to be," she answered honestly. "By disappearing inside myself when things became unbearable. By holding onto the smallest seeds of hope and nursing them in darkness until I could find light again." Jack reached for her hand, and this time she let him take it. His thumb traced the calluses, the healing cuts from her week of double work. "I've been cruel to you, judging you for surviving, punishing you for the crimes of others. Can you forgive me?" Clara felt tears prick her eyes. "There's nothing to forgive. You were honest about what you wanted. I was the one who came here under false pretenses." "No." Jack's grip tightened. "You came here looking for a chance at life. I'm the one who nearly threw that away because it didn't match my narrow expectations." They sat in silence for a moment, hands linked, the weight of understanding settling between them like snow. "I don't know how to start over," Clara admitted quietly. "I've been playing parts for so long. I'm not sure who I am underneath it all." Jack's free hand rose to cup her cheek, thumb brushing away a tear she hadn't realized had fallen. "Then we'll learn together. No more virgin bride, no more perfect wife. Just Jack and Clara, figuring out how to be honest with each other." The kiss was different from all that had come before, not the chaste touch of their wedding or the hungry possession of their wedding night, but something deeper. It tasted of recognition, of two damaged people choosing to heal together rather than apart. When they pulled back, Clara's eyes were bright with unshed tears. "I should check on the animals," she said, but made no move to go. "They can wait a few more minutes," Jack murmured, drawing her back. "I've wasted enough time already. Let me start making it up to you." This time, when he kissed her, Clara didn't have to pretend innocence or hide knowledge. She could simply be present, feeling the warmth of connection without the shadow of deception. Jack's hands were gentle but sure, holding her as if she were precious rather than pure, valued rather than virginal. "Stay inside tonight," he said against her lips. "It's too cold in the barn, and I need you close, just to sleep," he added quickly. "I'm not strong enough for more, and we need to talk more before anything else." Clara nodded, understanding. They had crossed a bridge, but there was still distance to travel. Trust broken so thoroughly would take time to rebuild, but for the first time since arriving in Wyoming, she felt the possibility of a future not built on lies, but on mutual understanding. That night, she lay beside Jack in their bed, both fully clothed, a careful space between them. But when nightmares of the compound crept in, his hand found hers in the darkness, anchor and promise combined. And when morning came, bringing with it the endless work of the ranch, they rose together to face it, no longer stranger and deceiver, but something new and fragile and infinitely worth protecting. Spring arrived slowly in the mountains, ice giving way to mud. white slopes revealing the green beneath. Jack and Clara had found a rhythm in the months since his recovery, working side by side, sharing quiet evenings, building something that wasn't quite love yet, but held its promise. The ranch prospered under their combined efforts, and if neighbors noticed Clara's unusual competence for a supposedly sheltered Eastern bride, they kept their thoughts to themselves. It was on a deceptively peaceful morning in early April that the past arrived on horseback. Clara was in the garden, coaxing early vegetables from the stubborn soil. When she heard the approaching hooves, she looked up, shading her eyes against the sun, and felt her blood turn to ice. The man dismounting in their yard was Thomas Hartley, one of Reverend Thornton's most trusted deacons, a term that had hidden darker duties at the compound. "Sister Clara," he said, his thin face splitting into a smile that had haunted her nightmares. "What a blessing to find you after so long." Clara's hand tightened on the hoe, calculating distances, to the house, to the rifle by the door, to Jack in the far pasture. "My name is Mrs. Holbrook now. State your business and leave. Such hostility toward an old friend." Hartley stepped closer, and Clara fought the urge to retreat. "Reverend Thornton has been deeply concerned about you, running away like that, stealing from the collection funds." "I stole nothing." The words came out sharp as winter wind. "I took what was owed for 6 years of unpaid labor." Hartley's eyes hardened. "You took much more than money. Sister, you took another girl down your path of sin. Poor Catherine met a terrible end. You know, the shame of her corruption drove her to take her own life." Clara knew it was a lie. Catherine's letter had arrived just last month, full of news about her new baby, but the casual cruelty of it still made her stomach turn. "What do you want?" "Why, to bring you home, of course. The Reverend is willing to forgive your transgressions. The community misses you." His gaze traveled over her, lingering in ways that made her skin crawl. "Some of the benefactors especially have asked after you. I have a home, a husband, a life that has nothing to do with you or Thornton." "A husband?" Hartley's smile widened. "Does he know what manner of woman he married? Does he know the things you've done, the men you've served? I imagine a decent man would be quite disturbed to learn his wife's true nature." The click of a rifle being cocked cut through the morning air. Jack stood 10 feet away, the weapon trained steady on Hartley's chest. Clara hadn't even heard him approach. "I know exactly who I married," Jack said, voice deadly calm. "Question is, who the hell are you?" Hartley's composure cracked slightly. "Thomas Hartley, representing Reverend Elias Thornton of the Holy Redemption House. I've come to collect a wayward member of our flock." "Collect?" Jack's laugh held no humor. "Like she's property, like she's cattle. She has obligations. She has nothing." Jack moved closer, rifle never wavering. "Nothing but the right to live free of men like you. Now, you can get on that horse and ride off my land, or I can help you off. Your choice." Hartley's face flushed. "You don't understand. Mr. Holbrook, your wife is a fallen woman. She's been with multiple men, participated in acts of depravity." The rifle butt caught him across the jaw before he could finish. Hartley crumpled, blood streaming from his mouth. Jack stood over him, fury radiating from every line of his body. "That's my wife you're speaking of," he said quietly. "The strongest, bravest woman I know. And if you ever come near her again, if you even think her name, I'll kill you. That's not a threat, it's a promise." Hartley scrambled to his feet, one hand pressed to his bleeding face. "You can't. I'll have the law. Try it." Jack smiled grimly. "Sheriff Morrison's a friend of mine. Be interested to hear what he thinks about your religious community that buys and sells women? Now get out." They watched Hartley ride away, his threats and curses fading into the distance. Only when he disappeared over the ridge did Jack lower the rifle, turning to find Clara trembling despite the warm morning. "Clara!" She launched herself into his arms, burying her face in his chest. "He'll be back. With others. They don't let people just leave. They'll do nothing." Jack held her tight, one hand stroking her hair. "We'll go to town tomorrow. Talk to the sheriff, the judge. Get your story on record." Let them try to take you through legal channels. See how their house of horrors stands up to real scrutiny. Clara pulled back to look at him. You hit him. Defended me. Of course I did. Jack cupped her face gently. Nobody threatens my wife. Nobody makes you feel less than what you are ever again. But the things he said were poison from a poisonous man. Clara, I've watched you these months. I've seen your strength, your kindness, your determination. Whatever happened in that place, whatever you had to do to survive, it doesn't define you. You define you. She kissed him then, fierce and grateful, tasting redemption on his lips. When they broke apart, both breathing hard, Jack rested his forehead against hers. We should prepare. He won't give up easily. Clara nodded. I know. I've been running for so long. Jack, I'm tired of it. Then we stop running. We stand and fight, together. They spent the rest of the day in preparation. Jack cleaned and loaded every weapon on the ranch, while Clara wrote out a detailed account of her years at the compound. Names, dates, the men who'd visited, the money that changed hands. It was painful, setting it all down in black and white, but also cathartic. Each word on paper was a truth she no longer had to carry alone. That night, they made love with a tenderness born of shared purpose. Jack worshipped every scar, visible and invisible, while Clara allowed herself to be truly present, truly feeling. For the first time, there was no performance, no hidden shame, just two people choosing each other completely. I love you, Jack whispered against her skin, not despite your past, but because of who it made you, my brave, beautiful wife. Clara's tears were different this time, clean, healing, like spring rain washing winter away. I love you too, for seeing me, really seeing me, when I'd forgotten how to see myself. They lay entwined as the night deepened, knowing tomorrow would bring challenges. Hartley would return with reinforcements or legal threats. The town would have to choose sides. Their quiet life would be disrupted by ugly truths dragged into daylight. But for tonight, they had each other. They had truth between them instead of lies. They had love built not on innocence, but on understanding. Not on purity, but on acceptance. Whatever comes, Jack murmured sleepily. We face it together. Together. Clara agreed, feeling the words settle into her bones like a promise. Outside, a wolf howled. Not lonely this time, but calling to its pack. And in the distance, an answering howl rose to meet it. Even in the wilderness, nothing had to be alone. Even the most wounded creatures could find their tribe, their home, their chance at happiness. Clara pressed closer to Jack's warmth and let herself believe, finally and fully, that she had found hers. The old church at the edge of town had been abandoned for 3 years. Its congregation moved to the newer building on Main Street. But today, it housed something that resembled Judgment Day. Rows of townspeople filling dusty pews. Sheriff Morrison maintaining order, and Judge William Brennan presiding from behind the makeshift bench of stacked hymn books. Clara stood at the front, Jack beside her, facing Thomas Hartley and 2 other men from the compound. The confrontation they'd prepared for had taken an unexpected turn when Hartley returned with legal papers claiming Clara had stolen money and violated her sacred contract of service. Sheriff Morrison, a fair man who'd known Jack since childhood, had suggested this informal hearing to settle matters before anyone involved the territorial authorities. Mrs. Holbrook, Judge Brennan began, his weathered face serious but not unkind. Mr. Hartley claims you were contracted to serve at the Holy Redemption House, and that you fled owing years of service and taking funds that weren't yours. What say you to these charges? Clara lifted her chin, drawing strength from Jack's solid presence. I say that no legitimate contract can sell a human being into slavery, Your Honor, and that's what the Holy Redemption House is. A place where young women are imprisoned and abused under the guise of religious salvation. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Some faces showed shock, others skepticism, a few nodding with grim understanding. That's a serious accusation, the judge noted. Can you elaborate? Clara had prepared for this moment, but that didn't make it easier. I was 17 when my father gave me to Reverend Thornton to settle gambling debts. I was told I'd be working as a housekeeper, earning honest wages. Instead, I found myself in a locked compound with other girls, forbidden to leave, to write letters, to speak to anyone outside. She was being reformed, Hartley interjected. Saved from a life of sin. Silence. Judge Brennan commanded. You'll have your turn. Continue. Mrs. Holbrook. Clara's voice grew stronger as she spoke, each word a stone removed from the wall she'd built around her trauma. We were told our bodies were temples, but temples for others to use. Men would visit, supposedly benefactors of the church, and we were required to accommodate them. To resist was to invite punishment. To speak of it was blasphemy. A woman in the back row began crying quietly. Martha Henshaw, the baker's wife, stood up suddenly. "It's true," she said, her voice shaking. My sister Anna was sent to a place like that in Kansas. When she finally came home, she was broken. Wouldn't speak of what happened, but we knew. We all knew. "This is hysteria," Hartley shouted. "These women are lying." "Then let's discuss facts." Jack interjected, producing a leather portfolio. "I have here letters from 6 other women who escaped from various redemption houses run by Thornton and his associates. Each tells a similar story. I also have this," he held up a document, "a bill of sale, essentially, showing that Reverend Thornton paid Samuel Mitchell $300 for the reformation rites of his daughter. Since when does reformation require purchase?" Judge Brennan examined the document, his frown deepening. "This is deeply troubling. Mr. Hartley, how do you answer these allegations?" Hartley's composed mask was cracking. "These are internal church matters, not for secular judgment. The girls who come to us are wayward, in need of firm guidance." "Firm guidance?" Clara stepped forward, her control finally breaking. "Is that what you call it when a 14-year-old girl is locked in a prayer cell for 3 days without food because she cried for her mother? When a woman is beaten for refusing to smile while being violated? When we were told God wanted us to suffer, that our pain was holy?" The church had gone dead silent. Even skeptics couldn't ignore the raw truth in Clara's voice, the kind of pain that couldn't be performed. "I have more evidence," Jack said quietly. "Financial records showing large donations from men who visited regularly. Names you'd all recognize, supposed pillars of communities across 3 states. This isn't about reformation. It's about money and power and appetites dressed up in religious clothes. You can't prove any impropriety occurred," Hartley insisted, but sweat beaded his forehead. "These women are fallen. Their word means nothing. Their word means everything." The voice came from the church entrance. Reverend Paul Garrett, who'd married Jack and Clara, walked forward with quiet authority. "I've been corresponding with colleagues in Boston and Philadelphia. The Holy Redemption House and its sister institutions are under investigation for fraud, false imprisonment, and worse. Reverend Thornton himself was arrested last month." Hartley went white. That's not possible." "It's more than possible. It's fact." Reverend Garrett turned to address the crowd. "I've stood in this community for 20 years, married your children, buried your dead. I tell you now with all the authority of my office, what was done to these women was not God's work. It was evil wrapped in Scripture, and it ends here." Judge Brennan nodded slowly. "Mr. Hartley, I find no merit in your claims against Mrs. Holbrook. Furthermore, I'm ordering you and your associates to leave this territory immediately. If you return or attempt any contact with Mrs. Holbrook, you'll be arrested for harassment and intimidation." "You can't," one of Hartley's companions began. "I can, and I have." The judge cut him off. "Sheriff Morrison, please escort these men to the territorial border. Make sure they understand the consequences of return." As the sheriff moved forward, Hartley locked eyes with Clara one last time. "This isn't over. You can't escape what you are." "You're right," Clara said clearly. "I can't escape what I am, a survivor, a woman who refused to be broken by men like you, and now, a wife who stands in the light with nothing to hide." Jack's hand found hers, warm and steady. Together they watched Sheriff Morrison escort Hartley and his men from the church. The crowd began to stir, voices rising in discussion, but Judge Brennan wasn't finished. "Mrs. Holbrook," he said, his voice gentler now, "what you've endured and overcome. This community owes you an apology for making you prove your worth in such a public manner. You've shown more courage today than most show in a lifetime." Clara felt tears threaten but held them back. "I just want to live in peace, Your Honor, to be judged for who I am, not what was done to me." "And so you shall," Reverend Garrett affirmed. He raised his voice to address the crowd. "Let today be a lesson. Evil thrives in darkness and silence. It's only when brave souls like Clara Holbrook bring truth to light that justice can prevail. I call on all of you to support and protect the vulnerable among us, that no more young women suffer such fates." As people began filing out, many stopped to press Clara's hand or murmur words of support. Martha Henshaw embraced her, whispering, "Thank you for speaking for my Anna. She never could." Finally, only Jack and Clara remained with Reverend Garrett in the dusty church. The afternoon sun slanted through cracked windows, painting everything in gold. "I believe," the Reverend said thoughtfully, "that this old church has served its finest purpose today, not in preaching, but in witnessing truth and delivering justice." "It's over," Clara said wonderingly. "It's really over. This part is." Jack agreed, wrapping an arm around her waist. "Now the real living begins." They walked out together into the spring afternoon. The mountains stood eternal around the town, but somehow they seemed less like walls and more like guardians. Clara breathed deeply, tasting freedom on the wind, not the desperate freedom of escape, but the settled freedom of belonging. "Home?" Jack asked. "Home," Clara confirmed. The word no longer a wish, but a truth. As their wagon rolled out of town, Clara looked back once at the old church. Through its windows, dust motes danced in the sunlight like celebrations of grace. She'd entered that building as a woman with secrets and left it as simply herself, scarred but whole, tested but unbroken, finally and forever free. The wolf that had haunted her dreams for so long was silent now. In its place, she heard only the creak of wagon wheels, Jack's steady breathing beside her, and the whisper of wind through new leaves. The sounds of a life reclaimed, a future restored, a love that had looked past shadows to find the light. 1 year later, the ranch had transformed. Where once stood a bachelor's stark dwelling now bloomed a true home, curtains at the windows, flowers in the garden, and the sound of laughter carrying across the valley. Clara stood on the porch, one hand resting on her swollen belly, watching Jack work with their new horse in the corral. The animal was skittish, abused by previous owners, but Jack's patient hands were teaching it to trust again. "Like calls to like," she murmured, feeling the baby shift within her. The past year had brought changes beyond the physical. Word of the church hearing had spread, bringing unexpected consequences. 3 young women had appeared at their door over the months, each bearing scars similar to Clara's, each seeking sanctuary. Jack had converted the old bunkhouse into quarters for them, and Clara had found purpose in helping these broken birds learn to fly again. "Mrs. Clara," Sarah, the youngest at barely 18, came running from the chicken coop. "The red hen finally laid, after all these weeks." Clara smiled at the girl's excitement over such a simple thing. Sarah had arrived 6 months ago, hollow-eyed and flinching at shadows. Now she found joy in eggs and sunrises, proof that healing was possible. "Sometimes," Clara told her, "the best things are worth waiting for." Jack approached, wiping sweat from his brow despite the cool autumn air. His eyes went immediately to Clara's belly, the protective concern that had grown stronger with each passing month evident in his expression. "You should be resting," he said, but his tone was gentle rather than commanding. They'd learned the difference between care and control. "The midwife says walking is good for me. Besides, I wanted to watch you work with Storm." "Storm?" Jack grinned. "You've named him already?" He survived the tempest of his past. Seemed fitting. Clara reached up to brush a streak of dirt from her husband's cheek. Like all of us here. They stood together, watching the sun paint the mountains gold. In the distance, the other two women, Rebecca and Mary, worked in the expanded garden, their voices carrying on the wind. The ranch had become an inadvertent refuge, a place where wounded souls could heal while contributing to something larger than their pain. "Letter came," Jack said, pulling an envelope from his pocket. "From Catherine." Clara's face lit up as she tore it open, scanning the familiar handwriting. "She had the baby, a girl named Hope. And listen to this. She and her husband are starting a legitimate school for girls in difficult circumstances. She wants to know if we'd be willing to advise them. Seems we're not the only ones turning pain into purpose," Jack observed. That evening, they all gathered for dinner. Jack and Clara, the three young women, and Tom Morrison, the sheriff's son who'd been courting Rebecca with painful shyness. The table that had once hosted silent, tense meals now rang with conversation and warmth. "I've been thinking," Mary said, her voice stronger than when she'd first arrived, "about what you said, Mr. Jack, about writing to newspapers, about telling the truth of places like where we came from." Jack nodded encouragingly. "Your story is yours to tell or keep, Mary, but if you're ready to speak it, there are people who need to hear." "I want to help," Sarah added quietly. "So other girls know they're not alone, so fathers think twice before making the choices mine did." Clara felt tears prick her eyes. Proud tears now, not painful ones. "We'll help you write them, all of us, together." After dinner, as the others cleared dishes and Tom tried to work up courage to ask Rebecca for a walk, Jack drew Clara aside. "I have something for you." He led her to his study, another new addition, and pulled out a leather-bound journal. "I've been writing too, to other ranchers, farmers, men looking for wives through advertisements." Clara opened the journal, finding pages of Jack's careful script. Her breath caught as she read, "Gentlemen, I write to you as a man who once valued the wrong things in seeking a wife. I demanded purity and got deception. I required innocence and missed strength. Let me tell you what truly matters in a partner." "Jack," she breathed. "I was a fool," he said simply. "Judging women by their misfortunes instead of their character. If my words can spare even one woman from facing what you faced." He cupped her face gently. "Then maybe my foolishness can serve some good." Clara kissed him deeply, tasting redemption and transformation. When they broke apart, the baby kicked strongly between them, making them both laugh. "Active tonight," Jack said, palms spread over her belly. "She knows her parents are building something important." Clara replied. "She?" Jack raised an eyebrow. "So certain. Mother's intuition." Clara grinned. "Though if it's a boy, I suppose we'll teach him to be the kind of man who sees women as full people, not property or prizes. And if it's a girl, we'll teach her she's worth more than her circumstances, that she has the right to choose her path, speak her truth, own her story." They stood at the window, looking out at their domain. The ranch had become more than either had imagined. Not just a home, but a haven. Not just a marriage, but a mission. In the bunkhouse, lamplight glowed as the young women prepared for bed, safe in the knowledge that tomorrow would be theirs to shape. "I've been thinking about the old church in town." Clara said, "Since it's sitting empty." Jack chuckled. "Let me guess. You want to turn it into something, a real sanctuary, a place where women in trouble can find help without judgment, where truth gets spoken and justice gets done." She turned to face him fully. "I know it's ambitious. It's perfect." Jack pulled her close. "We'll talk to Reverend Garrett tomorrow. I have a feeling he'll support it." As they prepared for bed, Clara paused at her dresser, catching sight of herself in the mirror. The woman looking back bore little resemblance to the frightened girl who'd stepped off the train over a year ago. This woman stood tall, belly round with new life, eyes clear with purpose. The scars remained, they always would, but they no longer defined her. "Coming to bed?" Jack called. "In a moment." Clara pulled out paper and pen, suddenly moved to write. The words flowed easily now. Truth no longer a burden, but a gift. To any woman who reads this, trapped in darkness and believing she deserves no better, you are not your circumstances. You are not what was done to you. You are the choices you make each day to survive, to hope, to reach for something better. There is life after trauma, love after betrayal, joy after sorrow. I know because I am living proof. She signed it simply. Clara Holbrook, wife, mother-to-be, survivor, and thriver. Outside, a wolf howled in the distance. Not lonely now, but calling to its pack, its family, its chosen ones. Clara smiled, sealed the letter, and went to join her husband. Tomorrow she would send her words into the world, another small light pushing back the darkness. But tonight, she would rest in the arms of a man who had learned to see her truly, in a home built on honesty instead of illusions, carrying a child who would know only love and truth. The virgin bride he'd wanted had never existed, but the woman she'd become, tested by fire, strengthened by survival, capable of deep love and fierce protection, was worth far more than innocence. As sleep took her, Clara's last thought was a prayer of gratitude, not to the twisted God of Reverend Thornton, but to whatever force had led her through darkness into light, through lies into truth, through a marriage contract into a love story that no mail-order advertisement could have predicted. The wolf sang again, and this time, the whole pack answered, a chorus of creatures who had learned that together they could face any winter, any threat, any challenge the wild world might offer. Just like the unlikely family now sheltered under this ranch roof. Proof that sometimes the most beautiful things grow from the harshest ground. Spring would come again, as it always did, and with it, new life, new hope, new chances to turn pain into purpose. The letter would be mailed. The church would be transformed. The baby would be born. But all of that was tomorrow's story. Tonight, there was only peace. Thank you so much for listening to this story of love, redemption, and the courage to overcome the darkest of pasts. I'd love to know where in the world you're listening from. Please share in the comments below so we can connect across the miles. If Clara and Jack's journey touched your heart, please subscribe to Wild West Campfire for more tales of strength, survival, and unexpected love in the American frontier. Share your thoughts about their story. What resonated with you? What would you have done in Clara's place? Your perspectives make these stories richer for our entire community. Until next time, partners, keep riding toward the sunrise.